Guys, welcome back to the channel. I am not going to be wearing a smile today. Well, I smile all the time. It's kind of hard for me to not wear a smile. My best friend just passed away this morning. And, yeah. So, it sucks both ways because now his wife is a widow. And she lives alone in Alaska. And as it says in Game of Thrones, winter is coming. You do not want to be a widow that has mobility issues in a state where snowfall is inevitable. So, his story, we're going to be making a video today in kind of a thing to honor his story and how I met him and all that stuff. He used to be I forget what sect of Christianity he was. Orthodox? No, it wasn't Orthodox. No, it wasn't evangelical. I remember, I forget. We had those conversations so long ago. But he used to be a pastor, and this was a guy who was pretty instrumental in my spiritual growth and in my certainty and all that stuff, walking away from Christianity. So the video today we're going to be doing is pastor leaving Christianity after 20 years, because that's basically what his story was. He was a pastor for a long time, eventually said, okay, you know what, this doesn't make sense to me, I don't feel that this is right, and eventually, like me, decided he was going to find his own route and did his own thing and kind of ended up at the same place that I ended up in life, which was, kind of on the Enlightenment teachings and all that kind of stuff. It's funny how people get there. Everybody gets there in kind of a different way, but he inevitably ended up being put on kind of the same path. And so we bonded very deeply, it was a bit of a father figure to me. And so, yeah. So he passed away of leukemia is what happened to him.
People ask me all the time why I stopped believing in Christianity and what caused me to lose my faith. Hey, I'm Dr. Todd Phillips. I'm a scholar of the Bible and a former megachurch pastor here in the United States. I used to preach in some of the largest churches in the country, and now I'm an agnostic atheist. Now, what you're about to see are the 8 biggest reasons I no longer believe Christianity is true, but they're not the only reasons. And no single one of them ended my faith overnight. It was a cumulative weight of all of them over about 10 years. So the first 3 deal with belief itself. Why people believe religions that they believe, why a God who supposedly wants a relationship with us remains hidden, and whether belief is even something that we can choose. What if I told you that religious belief is shaped almost entirely by geography? Here's how I discovered this truth and why it caused me, at least in part, to step away from Christianity.
Before we get into all the way, by the way, sorry for missing last night's live. I being on here at 8 o'clock, if you showed up and you were hoping to speak with me, I really do apologize, but this was the last place that my mind was at since he's been in the ICU on, I want to say Sunday night he went in, or Monday morning. I think it was Monday morning that he went in, like early. His wife called me, and yeah. So, as you can imagine, my hygiene has not been great since. Been staying home, just eating cookies. That's how I get through the tough shit. It's cookies and milk.
Christianity. This was really a map.
But I wanted to make a note here, just on the whole thing of seeking God, right? You're looking out to God. God, why aren't you coming to me? I'm calling for you. Why aren't you coming to me? That all stems from the idea that God is something that's separate from you. When you walk the path of enlightenment and you see beyond the veil, you recognize that God isn't this singular being that's sitting up in the clouds like fucking Simba in The Lion King, where you have the big dude, the big lion that like forms in the night sky and the clouds and all this kind of stuff. But what you learn is that the entirety of the universe and the entirety of all the consciousness in every being in the universe is a part of this collective consciousness that is called God, right? And so when you are, screaming out into the night sky expecting a reply from an individual being and you don't get a reply, it's just a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is that you're trying to communicate with. Now, with that being said, don't expect God to, it's incredibly interesting. It's incredibly interesting how the hell this experience even exists. But basically, if you actually want to try to connect with God and all that kind of stuff, the fastest and only way that you're ever going to achieve that is by going within, and it's through meditation, and it's through quieting your mind, quieting your awareness, quieting your consciousness, all that kind of stuff. And the reason is because we are so distracted. And when you are communicating with God, you're not communicating with the whole of creation, all that kind of stuff. I don't necessarily know that that's even something that you can communicate with, but what you can do is you can speak with different aspects of yourself and this is where you get the idea of the higher self, or the idea that, the awareness that sits behind the you that is acting, right? And so me, this body that you see, is the me that is acting. It's the me that is speaking. It's the me that's making this video. But I am not the me that is inside of this body, right? I'm separate from this me that you're looking at. And the first time that you ever leave your body, you can do it. I can teach you to do it. A lot of people can do it, but it's not recommended for people just willy-nilly separate yourself from your body, because there's a lot of other truths in the universe that would really make you not want to leave your body. And so, but with that being said, is it scary? It depends on the person that you are. If you're an absolutely pure, beautiful person, then leaving your body can be an amazing experience. But if you're not that, leaving your body can be a hellish experience. So that's why I don't ever really promote it on this channel, is because it can be a practice that can be very beautiful for some people and very, very traumatic for others. And so, it's best to just leave that till death. But if you have had the experience of separating from your body, you will understand that at the end of the day, you're not your body. You're just this weird conscious light. It's really fucking weird. I don't even know how any of us exist, but you're just this light. That's all you are, right? And so, and you still feel like you are very much you. There's nothing different between you and, there's nothing different between how you feel when you're inside of your body and when you're separated from your body. And so, but if you wanted to go down that journey, I did reach out to the Monroe Institute, and they are people who kind of specialize in that kind of stuff. They used to work with the CIA way back using the gateway process through, I want to say the gateway experience is what they've created, but essentially they use specific tones and stuff like that in order to get your body or your light body to resonate at a point to where it kind of jumps out of your body. It's all really interesting and stuff like that, but you don't want to just do it anywhere. You really want to be in a safe space to do it, which is why I don't really promote that, especially if this is like, now if you're a cowboy like me and you just go for shit, jump in and worry about the fact that the water's boiling later, have at it. I've done that so many times in my life, which is the reason why I've almost died so many times in my life. But with that being said, on my website, I have a lot of those things. I have a path that I take you down. It's free. It doesn't cost anything. I mean, it's not going to stay like that forever. That's certainly by the end of the year. I want to have all of these courses kind of done and buttoned up. And by the end of the year, they're going to be shut down to where if you do want access to them, just like everybody else, you have to pay for stuff. So get it while it's hot. I mean, it's hot, it's fresh, and it's free. These are the best things in life. I mean, especially imagine if somebody was like hot, fresh cookies. Oh my God. I'd put on 30 pounds in an instant. But that's just the thing. Even if you are a person who's not had, spiritual experiences and stuff like that before, you can do it. You can make it happen. I've seen people who have had zero experiences in their life experience this because of how they've designed that process at the Monroe Institute. So, but at the same time, you don't just want to go all willy-nilly into it. So, but that's a topic for another day. The point is that, this is why I never refer to it as God, because God is like, it creates this idea of a single entity that rules over all, and that's just not the case. It's just not the case. It's more of this big, massive, huge awness of just existence. Like, it doesn't think, it just is, right? Think about your day. So many things that you tackle. Oh, this is a positive experience. This is a negative experience. Well, perfect example. My best friend from Alaska, he just died, right? The experience in and of itself just is, right? He's a human being. He was not going to get out of this alive. If you think you're going to get out of this alive, I've got some bad news for you and for the people who love you. You're not leaving this experience alive, right? Hardly even trees make it out of this experience alive. So, you've got these, sorry, I'm thinking about I'm thinking about him. I forgot where I was even going with that. I shouldn't have used him as an example. Now I can't even think about what I was trying to. Your experience in life simply is, right? If you want to hate something, feel free to hate it. If you want to call it outrageous and horrendous, you can call it that. But the truth of the matter is that it just is, right? It just is that way, because this is the thing that we live on. This is the little floating rock that we live on, right? We look at things like cancer. He just died of leukemia, right? Fucking shit. He just passed away this morning too. But cancer, right? How do people get cancer? It's a lottery. Cancer's a nasty lottery. It happens from specific proteins in your in your cells not being manufactured correctly, or the genome in your in your DNA is damaged. It's damaged in a specific way that creates the proteins that monitor the life of the cell, right? So, for instance, every genome creates these little surface proteins and things like that, and so then your body uses these T killer cells in order to manage the health of the body. And so, whenever they see that a cell is not acting normally, which, to be honest, people get cancer all the goddamn time. But the difference is that, cancer, they only call it cancer, but the truth of the matter is that the cancer really starts at a replicating cell that has, some alterations, some issues with the DNA sequence that alters the expression of the proteins, surface proteins, things like that. So when you get cancer, what happens is that you existing on this planet can give you cancer. At any second of any moment, we are being bombarded by radiation. We are being bombarded by gamma rays. We're being bombarded by all sorts of subatomic particles that shoot through our atmosphere, that shoot through our bodies. I mean, really think about that. You have a little bullet that comes from the sun in the form of a piece of gamma radiation that is literally ripping through your body, maybe once every 10 seconds, something like that, right? You can take a cloud chamber, and you can just see how much radiation gets ripped off of the sun. Now, if you want a real show, you just take a little tiny radioactive disc, or maybe you get some uranium glass from an antique store, and you stick it inside this cloud chamber, and you see the absolute light show of radiation that comes off of it. But the truth of the matter is that we live on a planet where our DNA is susceptible to external stimuli. And that external stimuli can be the food that we take in. The external stimuli can be the radiation that comes from the sun. Even that I am inside of my house, I am not safe. There is solar radiation that is ripping through the ceiling, that is ripping through my body, that is ripping through the earth and passing out the other side. This is life, right? And so that's why I say is that even though it is horrible to die of leukemia or any sort of cancers or any sort of genetic conditions, we're not above nature. Okay, we're not above nature. You go out into the forest and you see a tree that all the other trees are perfectly straight, and this tree is all wanky and kind of weird looking. You don't run into the forest and go to that tree and say, "I'm so sorry for your misfortune." The tree is just a part of the forest. It's just a part of the ecosystem. DNA replication is not perfect on this planet, right? And so, yeah, I hear people all the time. It's like, well, there's horrible things that happen on this planet. Things happen on this planet. I don't see anybody running outside to the anthill outside, and the ants that are currently carrying a earthworm to the anthill to take it home to eat it. I don't see anybody standing up for the earthworm, for the grubs that are on the ground when the bird flies down and stops and kills the grub. I don't see anybody crying for the grub, right? For the trees that get cut down in order to make the houses that we sleep in. There are some people who cry for the trees, right? But for the most part, we all understand that this is how we make our houses, right? This is how humans die. We replicate, we live our lives, and then at a certain point in life, we have to die, and everybody You know, we believe whatever you want to believe, but a lot of people who've experienced near-death experiences and things like that, they often come back saying that, that this whole experience, that your experience from before your birth to after your death is all planned out. That I have no idea. I've never experienced anything like that. The only thing I've ever experienced is me being separate from my body. I've experienced that many times in my life. It is a fun state of consciousness, but the problem is that once you get to the point of being that sensitive, it's hard to maintain it. It's hard to control it, right? And so then it can be a problem with dealing with daily life, and it can become a very negative thing very quickly because, it doesn't matter what the hell is on the other side. If at the end of the day, you're struggling to make ends meet, then your attention needs to be here, right? But there are some people. I know one person personally who has this vivid memory of a pre-birth thing where he said that he remembers a time where he was formless and he basically saw everything that was going to happen in his life, and he said, okay, that looks like a beautiful experience. I want to go experience that. I think that's kind of a beautiful way of looking at life, but at the same time, I can't vouch for that. I have no idea. I haven't experienced that personally for myself. I can only speak from my firsthand experience on stuff. And I'm never going to speak from anybody else's experience because I don't know those to be true. I just know what I experienced, right? So, but with that being said, this idea that God is this outside, like whenever I was a Christian, so many times I would pray to God, God, please do something for me. God, please make this happen in my life. Please, God. And it would never damn happen. It would just never frickin' happen. It would never frickin' happen. No matter what I wanted to do, what I wanted to try, it always seemed like I was having to do everything my damn self. I don't know what was up with that. Other people were getting miracles left and right, and I'm over here like, damn, it's like he left his damn phone off the hook. For those who don't know what that means, God put his phone on silent. Just in case. What does he mean, phone off the hook? But yeah, let's get back into this. I inevitably will have more things to say.
Massive hurdle for me as a pastor, and it's something thinkers like Alex O'Connor, you should check him out. They talk about this a lot. It really breaks down into, I'd say, 3 uncomfortable realities. The first one is this kind of idea of the lottery of birth. Your GPS coordinates at your birth are the single greatest predictor of your religious identity. And the numbers are crazy. If you're in the U.S., 70% of people are Christian. But if you were born in Pakistan, 96% chance you'd be Muslim. In India, 80% chance you'd be Hindu. Poland is a 90% chance.
That's, don't even get me started on that, dude. I just, it's just like, you bring that up to somebody and being like, look, why is it that, my argument for everybody was the man stranded alone on an island who was born on an island, maybe his parents shipwrecked on an island. It's just a thought experiment, but maybe his parents shipwrecked on an island and he was just a child, and then the parents died, and somehow the child was able to survive, but never accepted Jesus Christ as his personal savior, And sure, he might have sinned, right? Maybe he did this, maybe he did that, maybe he cheated the monkeys in the on the island, or maybe he got mad and decided that he was going to start a fight with a baboon. A baboon. And so it's like, okay, so what happens to him, right? And apologetics, I do love, guys, if you just see Dan McClellan, I love him so much. He's such a good guy. Dan McClellan, here, let me see. Can I just show this to you while while I'm doing this, okay, let's see. We're at 132. Just in case. Oh, spree. Ignore that, guys. Does this prove? Oh, here, this one. Yeah. So you can see this. I was just watching this video by him, and he just goes through this idea: is God pro-life? And it's funny because at the end of the day, stop screen share, and then go back here. Yay! It worked. At the end of the day, oh wait, we're at 132.
People ask me all the time why I stopped. Look.
At the end of the day, the apologetics that's required in order to make the Bible make moral sense, there's too much legwork there. It's never going to happen. And people always just argue from inside the Bible, and they just run circles. And the thing with the Bible is that you can run circles in the Bible and be right about everything, right? You can argue in the Bible that there are parts in the Bible where God is shown to be this ultimate, unconditionally loving person. And there's parts in the Bible where God is shown to be this absolutely horrendous, fucked up being. And you can run laps between the parts where he's absolutely cruel and the parts where he's ultimately sacrificially loving and all this kind of crap. And the thing I like about Dan is his channel, he's Christian, but his channel is called Data Over Dogma. And he basically argues with Christians on the Bible, because this guy is just a biblical scholar to the max. I mean, he's Maximo of a biblical scholar, but he doesn't let Christians get away with apologetics bullshit, and I love that. And I can respect that. For a person who typically has an issue with Christians trying to make their Bible sound like it's this perfect, beautiful book, he doesn't try to do that, and I really respect that, because so many Christians try to make that happen, and he's just like, no, this is just how it is. And I'm like, okay. I can get behind you, believing that then, because then you're not trying to convince me that this God who's extremely mean, who kills people and does all this stuff, is also unconditionally loving. You accept that this reads exactly how it reads, and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so back to this.
None of us chose our starting line, yet it almost entirely determines what we perceive as eternal truth. And the second is what I call the sincere seeker problem. I used to think about this a lot. If someone in Thailand is just as humble, just as prayerful, just as desperate for truth as someone in Texas, but they arrive at a totally different absolute truth, does it make sense to say one is right and the other is just lost? I don't think so. It started to feel like they weren't seeking a different God, from my perspective. They were just living in a different ecosystem. If a truth is actually universal, it shouldn't look like a regional dialect, right? An all-loving, all-powerful, universal God wouldn't design a system where your eternal destiny is almost entirely determined by which border you happen to be inside of. And for me, once I saw that my faith was mostly based on geography, I just couldn't unsee it. It moved me from a place of real certainty in my faith.
Man, let that sink in a little bit. Mostly based off geography. Your faith is mostly based off geography. That is so damn true. Because if you were in Central America, being Baptist, you'd be Catholic. And according to the Baptists, the Catholics are going to hell. Because they're being deceived by Satan. That gets me. That gets me. They're so confident in their own belief that they have read this book perfectly. And the beings of centuries past have read it incorrectly. And they're all burning in hell now. But because we've read it correctly, now we're the ones who get to experience heaven. And then in 20 years, they're going to be the ones who read it incorrectly. It's like, Oh my God. It just wears me down. It just wears me down. I'm like, okay, guys.
A place finally of kind of honest empathy for the
It
billions.
is funny though. I do want to say something that was kind of funny. My dad and mom went to went to go do a Bible verse. And my mom, my mom is innocently ignorant. If I have to like, I think that's like a perfect description of my mom. like, she doesn't, she's just completely clueless, and you'll tell her and it'll be in one ear out the other. And she'll do it again, like goldfish brain. She'll do it again, and you'll bring it up, and she'll be like, oh my God, and you'll tell her, and she'll act like it's the first time she's ever heard it before. And it's like, I don't know if she's innocently ignorant or if she's a narcissist. One of those two. But it was funny, she was telling me, she was like, John, what verse? And I tell my mom all the time, because she's a really Christian lady, always wants to have a Bible study. I'm like, Mom, you don't want to have a Bible study with me. Trust me, you don't want to have a Bible study with me. I'll rip that shit apart. and and so she's like, well, I have to write out a verse. I have to choose a good verse to send to write out on this board for the children. And so she's like, what's your favorite verse in the Bible? And I'm like, I think it's Isaiah 45:7 or Isaiah 47:5, one of those two. There's a 4, a 7, and a 5. I don't know which one it is, but she reads it and she's like, oh, okay. She's like all excited that John picked a verse, Oh, he's turning Christian. He's still a Christian. He's picked a verse. And so she goes to write this verse out on the board, and she's writing the verse out before even reading it. And she's writing this verse out. And I am the creator of peace and evil. Oh. And she finishes writing the verse. And she just looks at it, and she's just like, what the fuck? It was so funny. It was so funny. It's like, because this girl's read the entire Bible. It's like her brain must have just skipped over that verse, But that's what, whenever Christians are like, I've read the entire Bible, sure, maybe you've read the entire Bible, but did you actually try to study and comprehend and understand each passage? Because most of us just want to say that we read the entire Bible so that we can have the little ego badge that says, achievement unlocked. Look at me, I've read the entire Bible 5 times, Like, it's just a stupid ego thing. And so, or not a proud ego thing, right? Like a show-off ego thing. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you comprehend what you're reading. It just means congratulations, you read it. You physically mastered getting through all that shit. There are some people who actually slow down and take the time to read and comprehend the Bible. And those people are often left with a lot of questions and stuff like that. And typically they end up following their own faith, their own ideas, and they end up at a church like what I go to. Which is more like a universalist kind of thing. And so it's funny because she was writing this out, and then she like reread the verse, and she was just like, and so she was like, oh well, we need context. And she goes back and she reads a little bit, and she's just like, oh, the context is still no good. She's like, well, why would God even say that he's the creator of evil and darkness? Like, what the shit, And and so now she was all, up in arms about it. And then the next thing you know, they went over to my childhood church to go to a service because they've moved away from where the church was, so they don't go there anywhere near as often. And they went over there, and what were they preaching on? They were preaching on Deuteronomy, where, how serious should you take disciplining your children? Well, it says here in the Bible that if you have an unruly child that doesn't listen to you, that you should take him out into the city, and that and that they should be stoned to death, and that you can basically kill your children for not listening. Right? This is what my old childhood pastor was preaching on this Sunday that they happened to show up. And my dad texted me. He's like, here, you can add this section of the Bible to one of your videos. Because he knows that I make, videos with kind of not an anti-Christian agenda, but an anti-fundamentalist agenda. And so it was kind of funny because I think it was like the following Sunday, he's like, hey, John, we're curious if we could go to church with you this Sunday. And I was like, I don't think you're going to like my church, because when you walk in, everybody's accepted, which means that you are going to see a trans person. And I know how you guys feel about trans people. You're going to see that, my pastor's gay. I know how y'all feel about gay people, So it's a really triggering church for fundamentalist Christians, which is why I love it. But
people who are just as sincere as I once was. Another reason I stopped believing in the Christian God is the issue of divine hiddenness. When you look at the narrative of the Bible, God supposedly establishes this clear precedent of making himself known in very clear, objective ways, like burning bushes, pillars of fire. He walks with Adam and Eve in the garden. Eventually he comes to earth supposedly as Jesus to perform undeniable miracles to prove who he is. Right? If those stories are true, then they prove one thing, that God is fully capable of providing objective, physical evidence of his existence without overriding our ability to choose him. And a common argument I used to preach, and I certainly hear from Christians all the time, to explain why God's actually silent today, is that a direct revelation would somehow force us to believe and destroy our free will. But I just cannot tell you, that logic doesn't really hold up at any level. Knowing someone exists is not the same as being forced to love or even to follow them. Even in the biblical story, Satan has absolute objective knowledge that God existed, and he still chooses to rebel. So free will all over the place. If knowledge were the same as coercion, that rebellion wouldn't have been possible. Look, the reality is that an all-knowing God, from my perspective, would clearly know exactly what every single person on the planet would require to be convinced that he exists. He would know, for example, exactly what I need to see and know and understand, and exactly what I would need to get from him to believe he's there. And yet he hasn't done that. If he's all powerful, he could provide that evidence right now. If a relationship with God is the most important thing in all existence, it just doesn't make sense that he'd remain hidden behind a veil of 2,000-year-old texts and subjective feelings. And that's really what it comes down to. Look, a loving father doesn't keep himself hidden. He shows up. He provides for his children. If your child is about to run out in the street and get run over, you go out there and you grab them and you take over the control of that situation to save them from that death. A good father doesn't leave people open.
So really quick, just to go a bit into the enlightenment path a little bit more. Now, once again, this channel is not about trying to get you to follow an enlightenment path. It's not for everybody. Trust me, that path is not for everybody. Not everybody wants to be on that path. So, if you enjoy, the pleasures of life, if you enjoy sex, if you enjoy, just all this stuff, don't do the enlightenment thing. It's gonna kill so much stuff for you. even religion and the idea of being right and all this kind of stuff, like, it's gonna absolutely kill all that kind of stuff. So it at the end of the day, you can still live a beautiful life, you can still live a loving life, and not necessarily have to walk down that path, right? Which is something that, Christians seem not to be able to understand, is that you can be a beautiful person. This was kind of my beef was, okay, what about the beautiful Buddhist lady that, that's very tender with everything, with her plants and with her family, and she's never hurt a single fly, and because there are Buddhist monks and stuff like that are out there that they will not kill insects because they see the light of divinity, the light of God, if you want to call it that, but it's not that. But they see this light of cosmic divinity inside of every single particle and every single thing that exists. And so because of that, the Buddhist monks tend to be very, very careful people, right? When they're stepping, they make sure that they step on clean stones because they don't want to hurt any of the leaves that might have fallen from a tree. If they're walking and there's a flower that's fallen on the floor, they want to make sure to respect that flower's resting place. All this kind of stuff, right? And so my thing was a person like that who is taking every single second of every single day to just be completely aware to his surroundings deserves to burn in an eternal lake of fire. That doesn't make any sense at all, you know. The other thing to keep in mind, just to go a little bit deeper. Now, on my channel, I actually have a whole course that I'm putting together, which is just showing the path that I took. Now, once again, if you want to enjoy your Friday nights, you know, and get drunk and have a good time and have a blast and all that stuff, you know, maybe the enlightenment path isn't for you, because trust me, it will kill your desire to do those things. And so, you know, like I said, it's not for everybody. But some of us have hobbies. Spiritual stuff tends to be my hobby. And some of us don't have hobbies. And you know, for other people, they like cars and trucks. And, you know, I got a compliment on my truck the other day. I was like, what in the world? Somebody's complimenting my truck? This feels so weird. Like, I don't even know what to do. And they were just like, yeah, man, I've always wanted a truck like that. And I'm like, thanks, bro. You can go pick one up at a junkyard. Like, because I just, you know, for me, it's like I don't necessarily care. You know, maybe I should care about appearances a little bit more, but for me, my life has always been about freedom and being able to go wherever I wanted to go, whenever I wanted to go, and things like that. And I'm bringing that back into my life. I'm going to be leaving Texas here. I've already made the decision. I've stayed here. Maybe this is getting a little bit too personal, but I've stayed here in hopes of reconnecting with a person, and I've given up on reconnecting with that person. And so I'm just ready to feel like me again. And me is a crazy fucking guy who goes all over the planet doing stupid fucking shit, in the pursuit of finding out what this experience is. I love that. That's like if I had to put me in a nerdy ass sentence, that would be me in a nerdy ass sentence. Ever since I was like 10 years old, I was praying to God to give me the secrets to the universe. Like, what the fuck kind of 10-year-old kid prays that shit? Fucking weirdo. But no, on this idea that he's actually talking about right here. So this idea of God, all this stuff, you know, one of the ideas in Enlightenment teachings, now, once again, no experience on this path. Why? Because I've not experienced it. So I don't know. But one of the teachings is that the whole of consciousness, the all of consciousness, is this thing that simply is playing and it's experiencing. And that's all that it's doing. It's just this big blob. You know, imagine that you were the only thing that existed inside of nothing, and you were bored. What would you do if you were inside of a room? If you were inside of a room and you had absolutely nothing but white screens everywhere, or maybe black screens, right? We can act like it's just this thing that exists in darkness, right? And let's take away the body. Right? So we'll give it a brain and eyes and stuff like that, but we'll take away the body. That way you can't look down and see that there's a body and all that kind of stuff. So you're just this big floating head, okay? And so you can't really interact with the environment. You can't really do stuff. But you're just this thing that exists that doesn't know why the hell it exists. Well, what can you do? Well, you can close your eyes and you can imagine, and you can play this game of imagining up a world that doesn't exist, right? So there's a path of teachings in the Gnostic texts. If you go over to his channel, Morgue Official, he's a great guy when it comes to kind of, he doesn't really focus on dismantling the Bible. He talks about all the books that existed surrounding the Bible and all of the teachings that surrounded the Bible that were basically rejected by mainstream Christianity. the heretic thing, if you wanted to take that route. But there's plenty of people who do a great job of dismantling the Bible. It's not really the space that I try to be in, but but basically, the whole idea is that there is this consciousness that just exists, that in an attempt to understand its own existence fragments itself into other things to experience itself again, right? And so, maybe God is just this thing that is just like, and it's just like this thing that floats out into the all of consciousness or the cosmos or the universe or whatever, and it just was like staring at stars, and it was just like, I wonder what it would feel like to be hurt. And then it decided to dream up this world where two people are in a fight, right? I wonder what it would be like to be like this. And so there's this idea that the experience that we're having is not so much for us to find out if we're going to make it to heaven or hell, but it's much more neutral. The experience is just we are experiencing, and that is satisfying God's curiosity, right? The experience of boredom, the experience of love, the experience of pain and hurt, the experience of this, the experience of that, right? It's just satisfying the ultimate potential boredom that exists in a state of knowingness. And there's this other idea that the entire universe is incredibly cyclical, as we see that in our planets, in our universe, in our galaxy, all that kind of things. We're just a big, massive thing of cycles. There's just cycles after cycles after cycles, right? And there is this idea that this big bang, just like an explosion, goes out, that it inevitably will suck back up into one, and then we'll be in kind of like this divine presence of, once again, of just this pure conscious awareness that has nothing to do, and then it gets bored again, and poof, and then it just sits there and just does these massive cycles, right? And that this will go off into eternity. And so if you hate existing, I'm sorry, I've been there, trust me, I've been there where I hate existing. But at the end of the day, it's just taking a far less life. This life is spiritually important, right? It's more like, well, this life exists, and this is where we are, and we're a part of this experience. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. I know I have my own opinions and all that kind of stuff on that specific topic, but it's nothing that I would be able to speak from any sort of experience. I'd only be able to speak it from opinion, and so yeah. But yeah, that's kind of if you guys are a little bit curious as to like the enlightenment path, or maybe like the Buddhist idea or something like that, it's more of this idea that the whole of consciousness is just this big, massive awareness that existed, that was curious about itself, and is currently playing inside of its mind, which is why it's detached from the idea of feeling, of a specific person being hurt, a specific person being this or whatever, because, if this big, massive cosmic consciousness is just playing around and is just experiencing, then we would understand that, out in the plains of the Serengeti, where the zebra is getting attacked by the lion, that is also both aspects of consciousness, one consuming, one being consumed, that kind of thing. And so there's more, it's more grounding of we are a part of nature, we're human beings on a big fucking planet, and our size is relatively small compared to the absolute ginormity of the universe. And so, don't get so worked up about stuff. That's my thing. I love going out and looking at the stars and looking at the universe, because it just makes me, just not care as much, And it sounds a bit, like, what, you should care. Well, you don't have to care if you don't want to. If caring is something that's going to be damaging to you, then you don't have to care, right? You can care about things to the point where it's detrimental and it hurts you. and you can care about the things that are important for you to care about, like your own personal health and things like that, right? But at the end of the day, the whole purpose of the soul, the whole path of the soul, is just to recognize the divinity that existed inside of it, that has always existed inside of it, and understand that, that divinity is ultimately already a part of the ocean that exists, right? So you can consider God or cosmos to be this ocean, and us to be these little droplets of seawater that are taken out by pipettes out of the ocean. At the end of the day, are we seawater? Yes, we're seawater, but we are experiencing separation from the ocean. And if you just drop us onto the floor, nature will take its course, and whether it's through evaporation or whether it's through groundwater movement, inevitably we will all eventually find our way back to the ocean, in which case we can either decide if we want to separate and experience this again or not. If you're curious about reincarnation stuff, I have a bunch of videos on my website. You can click down in the description, go over to the website. You'll see a little thing that says Science of Universal Consciousness. And in that program, we go over a few of the reincarnation. There's thousands of reincarnation cases, but it goes over some of the older reincarnation cases that existed before the internet, all this kind of stuff. And so I like to take that stuff a little bit more serious, because I think the internet has muddied up the water as far as clean data is concerned. So anyways, back to this video.
Alone, children alone, to struggle in the dark. For me, the idea that God is hidden to protect us and our free will is more of an excuse for the absence of God. At some point, a hidden God and a non-existent God look exactly the same.
And so the whole point there that I was trying to make with what he was saying is that, the idea that God needs to care about me, you exist as this spark, this little tiny droplet of God. And so, do you care whenever a skin cell dies on the surface of your skin? Do you care when a hair follicle falls out of your head and is swept away in the drain, right? There's a much more neutral stance and neutral understanding to this conscious experience. And it's also understanding that, human suffering, right? We always look at human suffering as this absolutely horrible thing, but we're the same people who go out and put poison out for ants. We put poison out for mice. We put out traps that brutally kill mice, that brutally kill these rats. I'm no better. Right now, my car is in the garage with the motor all torn apart because I'm doing a motor on that vehicle. And I don't want mice to go inside of the vehicle and pee and chew up all the wirings and create a wiring shitstorm for me. So I have poison everywhere to kill the mice before they go into my vehicle and start creating hundreds of more dollars worth of damage, actually thousands of more dollars worth of damage. And so, but that is the experience of being a human, right? In my garage, I have a spider, and I leave that spider there. It's a big fucking spider, fat fucking guy. I mean, he's huge and he's scary, but I leave him there because he's got this massive damn web. And I live out in the woods where every single time I turn the lights on at night, there's insects that come out of the woodwork, literally, and go into my garage, especially if I'm doing anything at night. And so I put a little nightlight right next to his nest. And every night when I go to sleep, the nightlight comes on and he gets to have an absolute feast, right? And so who is suffering in that scenario, right? Because hundreds of insects are dying every single day in order to feed this big, massive spider. But on the other hand, I'm experiencing the pleasure of waking up to a clean garage void of all insects except one spider, right? And so, humans like to call ourselves special, separate ourselves from nature, say that we're superior to every animal on the planet. We're a part of this planet. We came from this planet. When we die, we go back to this planet. The idea that we're going to set ourselves as, dogs die of cancer, elephants die of cancer. We don't see people out there screaming and crying because an elephant died of, leukemia, but it happens, right? And so that's the thing, is that the universe in and of itself, it's neutral. It just, things happen, right? It is a part of this experience. But we attach our pain, we attach our desires. We say, no, 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 that's right, that's wrong, and it has to be that way. And in having to be that way, you create your own suffering, your own mental anguish, and your own disconnection from God, which is, the universe, or the whole of consciousness, or whatever the hell it is, right? Who the fuck knows? And so you create your own separation in that way. And in your own way, you will feel disconnected. And so how do you feel connected? You give up. You just give up. You surrender. You stop trying to have a good day, and you just decide to allow the day to be the day that it's going to be, right? You decide to stop trying to force a bad day to turn into a good day, and you just allow all of the things that want to be thrown at you to be thrown at you, right? And you just stop trying to control everything, because you understand that I am just this little tiny speck of awareness in the ginormity of the universe. And it doesn't fucking matter, right? It just doesn't fucking matter. Now, a lot of people, they can get really depressed about this idea that their lives don't matter. I get it, because when I went on the enlightenment path, there was a point of time where I was like, wow, this experience doesn't matter. And it's kind of ludicrous and crazy. I don't want to be here, Like, that's a very natural response to, especially if you're going down an enlightenment path, which is why I say it's not for everybody. So, this is why I promote figuring out your own way, finding out what you want to do, because some people will not experience, absolute joy and pleasure and all this kind of stuff on the path. They'll find it elsewhere. And so, okay, go have your fun. There's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, if an ant went to a honeydew plant, and the honeydew plant was intoxicating to the ant, and they snuck away from the colony to go bathe in their honeydew. Okay, the ants are doing their thing, right? We don't give a shit about it as human beings, right? Now let's imagine that you're this ant colony, and God, these large forces of the universe, has just wiped out our entire colony. Why in the world would God do that to us? Well, no, it's Jerry was trying to get rid of the ants in his lawn. Sorry, ants, it's not that big of a deal. It wasn't that serious. Jerry wanted green grass, and you guys decided to build a big fucking colony in the middle of Jerry's lawn. And Jerry loves his green grass. If you would have built your colony over in Fred's yard, Fred couldn't give a shit. Fred wouldn't give a damn. You could go to Fred's house and live a happy life as a big, massive ant mound. But you happen to have your ant mound in Jerry, and Jerry doesn't like ants. And so that's the reason why poison was spread all over your colony, and so many of you were massacred and killed. It's just because Jerry wanted green grass, and you were kind of killing that aesthetic vibe, right? So this is why I say it's, when you accept how brutal we are as human beings to life itself, you start to see how sometimes life itself is brutal to human beings, and you start to think, this is the law of nature. This is how we exist, and so you can find beauty in that. You can find beauty in the idea that, this experience is temporary. And, with the reincarnation, you can find beauty in the idea of, this life's not working out for me. On the next one, I'm going to be born into a billionaire family. I have no idea. I have no idea if it works like that. I like to think that it works like that, but ultimately I don't know. And so, you get to the other side, figure it out, and phone me back and let me know, But yeah. Anyways, with that being said, let's get back to this.
I didn't choose to stop believing in God. This is one of the things I wish Christians really understood better. People will say in the comments, hey, Todd, you were warned. Or when you stand before God on Judgment Day, you'll know the truth. As if I'm standing here with this full belief in God and just refusing to submit to him. That's just not the case. That's not what happened. I was a Christian for most of my life. I preached the gospel for more than 20 years. I taught people how to be saved. I prayed and studied the word daily and defended Christianity. I built my entire life around the word of God, and I believed I had an intimate relationship with the Christian God. And then, over time, I simply became unconvinced. That wasn't a choice in the way I choose a shirt to put on each day. Is a choice. I didn't wake up one morning and decide, hey, I think I'll stop believing in God today. I just reached a point over years of questioning where the reasons I had for believing no longer convinced me that the Christian God was real. And you know that's true, Christian, because you can't force yourself to believe things either. You can't choose to believe in Islam just because a Muslim warns you about Muslim judgment. You know, you can't choose to believe in Mormonism just because a Mormon comes to your door and tells you that you've been warned. You know, you can't choose to believe in a Greek God or a Hindu God or any other God claims just because someone threatens consequences. Belief doesn't work that way, and you inherently know that. If you're a Christian, you can choose to study, you can choose to listen, you can choose to stay open.
Christianity requires indoctrinating children. It absolutely requires catching these people at the youngest of ages. You know, without that, you know, it's crazy. But as an adult, when you form an adult, and this is also a thing, I don't know that this is true, okay? I just hear stuff online sometimes, and this is one of those things that I just heard online. The idea that the reason why the U.S. military historically has never allowed people who are, you know, older than 25, 26 to join the military. They've never allowed people in their 30s and 40s to join the military. Is not so much because of the inability to move, which I'm sure there's some credit to that, but it was the ability to submit to a younger person. You know, if you're a 35-year-old and your lieutenant that you have to take orders from is 20, and he is treating you like dog shit, and your sergeant is treating you like dog shit, and your sergeant's only 21, and you're 35, there's gonna be a real conflict that's going on there. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but I think it's interesting. With that being said, I don't even know why I said that.
Open, you can choose to be honest about your beliefs, but
yeah, I forgot why I said that. I was going somewhere. ADHD kicked in, and now I'm going to go back to the video.
you can't choose to believe. You can't choose to be convinced. And that's where I am. I'm not refusing God, the God that I know is real. I'm not angry at a God I secretly believe in. I'm not choosing rebellion over truth. I'm simply not convinced Christianity is true anymore. That's it. Look, and if God exists, he knows that better than anyone. So once I understood how strongly geography and culture shape religious belief and how hidden God remains, and that I couldn't simply choose to believe, I had to go back and examine the entire foundation Christianity depends on, which is the Bible. So some of my questions were around the idea, if the Bible is a clear revelation from God to humanity, I'd really expect it to look and actually function differently.
Blosser, I'm going to get back to you, man. Bossler, I think what's his last name. But yeah, I mean, in the last video, we did the thing on Genesis where it shows that, you know, Genesis is just this recreation. It's just this put togetherness. It's just this compilation of a bunch of different ancient texts that is kind of written with an agenda, right? People say, no, it's impossible. It's impossible. Well, first of all, we don't even know that Moses existed. There's no archaeological evidence. There's no Egyptian writings, the whole story of Moses. We don't know that Moses actually existed as an individual human being. Now, with that being said, let's give the benefit of the doubt that Moses did exist. How would Moses know the conversations that happened in the Garden of Eden? How would Moses know the conversations that happened between God and himself when he was creating everything? How would Moses know the conversations that happened between Adam and God, between Adam and Eve, between Eve and God, between Cain and Abel, between God and Cain, between God and Abel, right? All of these things. And whenever Cain left the garden, why was he afraid of the people of Nod? right? There's a whole ass other civilization of people that Cain is afraid to leave the garden to go to. And so what's with that? So you have these two first human beings, and when one of them leaves the Garden of Eden, there's a whole ass other country that they're already afraid of, you know. And so there's a lot of things that just don't make sense. And on top of that, you have to accept that Moses channeled all of this information, right? If you take the idea that Moses channeled all of this information, then it's that only muddies up the water even more, because then you have to start looking at all sorts of things that people supposedly channel. And to be frank, there's a lot of channeled texts. I cover the texts all the time. A Course in Miracles is one of the texts. A law of one, or the law of one, I think, was one of the first channeled texts that was kind of brought to me on my path, which was kind of some of my early exposure to Enlightenment teachings and things like that. And this is very much kind of crazy woo-woo. A lady was sitting down and she shut her eyes, and she was somehow able to connect with these extraterrestrial beings. And you know, this lady who prior had zero knowledge of really anything kind of interesting is able to pop out 5 books of information that also tends to match everything that's written in the texts that surrounded the Bible, in texts to come years later, and texts that are even mentioned in kind of these earlier ideas of enlightenment and awareness and things like that. And so I'm always kind of baffled how these channeled texts all seem to have this silver cord that runs through them. Everything's got its BS, right? But the Bible in and of itself, if it is a channeled text, well, it just doesn't fit any of the other channeled texts that humans have ever created. Or maybe it does. Maybe I haven't seen some of the other ones, but you know, this idea is that, you know, the idea that Christians accept in general is that Genesis is created by Moses, God speaking directly to Moses to write down word for word what was created. Okay. We don't even know that Moses existed. Like, we have looked and we have tried. Durante Lamar on his channel, he goes through all the stuff as to whether or not Moses actually existed, and there is no conclusive evidence that Moses ever existed, because all of the stories associated to Moses, especially with everything that happened in Egypt, you would expect it to show up in Egypt, in Egyptian stories. And they search high and low, and they search absolutely everywhere, and nowhere in any of the Egyptian stories that were preserved, nowhere does it talk about any of these, any of these biblical, stories that happen in the book of Exodus. None of these stories pop up in Egyptian archaeology. And so, if we just go based off of Egyptian archaeology, right? Imagine if I said, oh, I went to India and I did all of these things, and now I'm coming back to the Americas and look at me. And somebody else went to India and they were just like, yeah, we don't even know that guy existed. Okay, well, now my stories are all kind of, flugged up and fabricated, right? And so that's what they're figuring out with Moses, is that there's no record of this idea of Moses. And even the idea of the basket, a person being put into a basket. We did that in the last video, the idea that Moses was put into a basket. Well, there's similarities. And the problem is that, it's one thing to have similarities with stories, but when these stories are prevalent stories and prevalent, religious ideas that existed before you start writing, right? Moses was a person who, according to the Bible, was very much learned in the Egyptian folklore and all that kind of stuff, right? And so I'm sure he was very aware of these ancient texts and these ancient, Babylonian tablets and Sumerian tablets and all this kind of stuff. I'm not perfect at all that kind of stuff. But it's hard to believe that the book of Genesis was a pure automatic writing experience or a pure channeled experience or something like that. So Moses. You should go look up the case for Moses existing. It's not a solid one. It is not a solid one. And when you consider that Genesis, Exodus, I want to say even Leviticus, maybe I'm not sure. But the very foundational books of the Bible, where all of the miracles happened, there's no evidence that the guy who wrote that even existed. It's like, oh shit.
From an ordinary human book. But the more closely I examined the Bible, it looked exactly like what we would expect if humans actually wrote it. If God wrote a book, I would expect it to sound more like God wrote it. And I don't honestly mean that as a cheap shot. I used to believe the Bible came from God, and I preached it that way. I built my life around it. I preached that others should trust it and obey it and build their eternity and lives around it. But if this book really comes from an all-knowing, perfectly good, all-loving God, why does it sound exactly like the ancient world that it came from? I mean, really, why does it contain laws condoning, endorsing slavery instead of just saying slavery's wrong? Just don't do it.
Yeah.
God has no problem saying murder is wrong and lying is wrong and stealing is wrong. Why does it treat women in ways most of us, I would like to say all of us, would never defend today? Why does it prescribe death for breaking the Sabbath? Why does it contain so much violence that later on Christians have to explain away and soften and contextualize and defend? And look, I understand the Christian answer. I gave the Christian answer from the pulpit for 2 decades. I knew how to talk about context and progressive revelation and ancient culture and, God meeting people where they were. I knew all the ways to make the Bible sound like it made sense. But that answer only worked because I started with a conclusion that the Bible was perfect and couldn't be wrong. Because if ordinary people can take a look at this Bible and just look at parts of it and immediately say that shouldn't be in there, then we should all ask why a perfect God put it in there in the first place.
So on the idea that why doesn't God write his own book? Well, so here's the thing. I don't think anybody can interact with God because God is this singular point of awareness. I don't know that it has thoughts. Like, okay, so we exist, and we exist maybe potentially as a thought form, but what happens when a thought form tries to interact with the original thought? Like, I don't even know. But into channeled texts and things like that. There's Raw, the Law of One, and this Course in Miracles. I like the Course in Miracles. It's more digestible for people who are leaving Christianity. For those who don't know the story about this book, a voice came to Helen Schuckman. Helena Schuckman? I keep forgetting this lady's name. Helen Schuckman. So, she was where did she go to? University of Columbia? What is it? Columbia University's College of Physicians and Surgeons in New York. So she was a professor of medical psychology at Columbia. So an incredibly intelligent person. She grew up Presbyterian, but then became atheist. And in her practice, a voice came to her, and she was thinking that she was going to need to get herself committed to the institution because she was hearing voices, and she's a professor of psychology, and so she's thinking, okay, well, I'm working at a mental hospital. Maybe it's gotten to me. Maybe I deserve to be checked in. And she just decided with one of her companions, Bill, something. What's his name? It's not mentioned here in the front. Bill. That, rather than just immediately checking yourself in, why don't you just say, okay, because this voice was telling her to write a book. And so Bill was just like, well, instead of just immediately checking yourself into a mental institution, why don't you just write the damn book that the voice is, talking to your mind. So she says, okay, whatever, what the hell, let's just fucking do it. I'm going insane anyways, let's just write a fucking book. So then she popped out this very light reading coffee table book. As you can see, it's pretty small. You could finish it in a couple hours. My ass. And they're thin pages. It's like the damn Bible. Like they're really thin pages. How many pages is this thing? 86, my ass. 16. Why do the pages keep resetting? It's like the pages keep resetting. Okay, I don't know, but I'm going to guess it's got around 900 to 1,200 pages, something like that. Yeah, because it seems to reset every couple hundred pages. Like it goes up to 150, it goes up to page 400. All right, well, this is irrelevant. Anyways, in this book, this is Jesus Christ appears to this lady, and he appears to this lady to set the record straight because Christianity fucked it up, and he is appearing to this lady in spirit to set the record straight, right? And in this setting the record straight, this does not read like the Bible. It reads like any other Enlightenment teaching book, okay? It reads like the whole of consciousness is something that you are a part of. It's something that you shouldn't be trying to fight. It's something that you don't necessarily have to try to connect with because it is already a part of you. You are a part of this crazy fucking experience that nobody understands. And that even me on the other side, I don't completely understand it. Who can completely understand it? And so I like to read this very, very end of the book in the clarification of terms. He goes over Jesus Christ, goes over what he was and the Holy Spirit and all this other kind of Christian ideologies that have come up. And he starts off by saying something that's really, really powerful, that is something that is a very, in the Enlightenment teachings, it's a very standard thing. But so on the clarification of terms, on the clarification of Jesus Christ, I guess maybe passage 1 or verse 1, I don't know what you would call this, but he says, "There is no need for help to enter heaven, for you have never left, but there is need for help beyond yourself, as you are circumcised by false beliefs of your identity, which God alone established in reality. Helpers are given you in many forms, although upon the altar they are one. Beyond each one there is a thought of God, and this will never change. But they have names which differ for a time, for times need symbols, being itself unreal. Their names are legion, but we will not go beyond the names of the course itself employs." So names being the Buddha, Jesus, Vishnu, all these kind of high, perfectly enlightened beings and all this kind of stuff, right? And so anyways, he goes on to explain the experience of the cosmos, which is what we are experiencing, right? This in and of itself. So I think it's really, really interesting. And you can kind of just use this book like an oracle, just pop open to a page and put it down and be like, okay, and read somewhere. Some people use it that way. This is just like the Bible. It's a lot to read, and not a lot of people have that much time, especially when you're focused on reading these books here. So I'm not focused on reading this book at the present. I've listened to an audiobook. I've listened to this entire thing in an audiobook version, but I've not actually sat down to read it. ADHD, remember. So, but the point is that, to be frank, if this book actually did come from Jesus Christ and it was 100% authentic that Jesus Christ was the spirit that wrote this book shatters Christianity. Absolutely shatters Christianity. And it indicates that, the whole idea of suffering, the idea of suffering is just what we create for ourselves. We exist on a planet where things are imperfect, and whenever these imperfect things become apparent, we call them atrocities. The reality is that we live on an imperfect planet where things are imperfect. Things die, things get killed, things get, and it's really interesting. But anyways, I'm not going to get to that right now. Let's get back to this.
For
But that was just kind of like the first thing that came to my mind whenever he said that.
years, my job was to defend the Bible. Now I have to be honest about what I see. The book looks deeply and unmistakably human. There isn't one Christianity. There are thousands of Christianities. The Baptists think they have the correct version. The Catholics think they do. The Calvinists think they do. The Pentecostals are certain that they do. The progressive Christians, they think so. And they all point to the same Bible.
Yeah.
So I decided to do a simple thought experiment. Let's just take 8 major Christian doctrines and use extremely conservative numbers for how many major views exist in each one. So, baptism, 2 views. Communion, 3 views. Salvation, 2. Can salvation be lost? 2 views. Predestination and free will, 3 views. Hell, 3. End times, 3. Biblical inspiration, 3 views. Now, multiply those together. Don't add, multiply.
Yeah.
The result is 1,944 possible combinations of Christian belief. And remember, I intentionally grouped many views together and ignored dozens of other doctrines that Christians still
Make sure you got the right combination. You know, my drunk uncle, I have to give this to my drunk uncle. He's the first one who opened my mind to this idea of how can everybody be holding the same book and still telling each other they're going to hell. At the time, I was 10 years old. I was I sent my cousin. I'm ashamed of 10-year-old Johnny. But people used to call me Johnny whenever I was a kid. And whenever I was like 10 years old, 8 years old. When I was 8 years old, I told my dad, I don't want to be called Johnny anymore. It sounds childish. It's like, okay, so what do you want to be called? I was like, I want to be called Sonic the Hedgehog. It's even worse. Oh, it's an amazing moment. And then I told him, I was like, or Shadow. I could do Shadow. I loved Shadow. I thought he looked so cool. But yeah, my drunk uncle, while we were at home having a Bible study, I was maybe 11 years old, 12 years old, something like that. My drunk uncle comes stumbling in while me and another family from church are having a Bible study, or my family and another family from church are having a Bible study, and he's drunk off of his ass, just spitting balls of truth, man, just not giving a fuck. And my mom is like horrified and so embarrassed by the whole situation. And the poor family who's visiting from church, the guy was Colombian, so he understands a drunk Hispanic. And so he decides he's going to try to witness him and try to win my uncle to God, to being Baptist, because my uncle would never take on a religion. He would never take on a religion. You know, he went to church, he got saved, but then he started thinking about it, and he was like, this shit doesn't make any fucking sense. Why the fuck did I get saved, you know? But anyways, so he's telling the church family guy, dude, he was like, while he was trying to share his belief, he was like, why is it that, you know, whenever somebody tells me that I'm going to burn in hell and that I need to change from my wicked ways, you know, they always have that specific book in their hand, but they always point to everybody else and tell everybody else that they're going to go to hell, but they always have that specific book in their hand. How do I know that you're the one who's reading that book right? Because my wife, she's Mormon, she has that book, and she says that we have to believe this way. And you're Baptist, you have the same book, but you say I have to believe this way. And I go to a Catholic, they have the same book, and they say I have to believe this way. And so why is it that everybody always has the same book, but everybody's burning in hell? You know? At the time, my 12-year-old mind was like, what the fuck? You know?
Like creation, women in ministry, spiritual gifts, church authority, LGBTQ inclusion, atonement theories, divorce and remarriage, and many others. Once you add just a handful of those, the possible combinations explode into the millions. Millions. So when someone tells you that's not true Christianity, I hear that all the time, what they usually mean is that's not my Christianity. The question isn't whether Christians interpret the Bible differently. They all clearly do. The question is why a supposedly clear message from a perfect God produces thousands of denominations, thousands of interpretations, and nearly 2,000 possible combinations from just 8 major doctrines alone. And listen, if you're deconstructing because you couldn't make all of that make sense, you are not the problem. You were handed a Bible that Christians have never agreed how to read, then told the message was clear. You didn't fail to understand Christianity. Christianity failed to ever speak with one clear voice. The evangelical gospel has an Adam and Eve problem. Original sin only works if Adam and Eve were real historical people. And I don't think they were. Because if Adam and Eve weren't real people, then there was no historical fall of man. And if there was no historical fall of man, then one of the central pieces of evangelical Christianity just collapses. Now, I know people in the Christian community will say, hey, people still sin. And of course people do harmful, selfish, cruel things. And that's not the point. The point is original sin. The point is the idea that humanity inherited guilt and corruption, death, and a broken relationship with God because the first human beings, Adam and Eve, just disobeyed God in a real garden. At least that's the story.
So how does that make sense that this all perfectly loving creator cursed all of humanity? You know, this creator does no evil, yet his curses seem to persist throughout eternity, right? He cursed us, and then he opened the door and say, but I love you, you can come back, but fuck you. You know, this is where I say that Christianity is like a person who points a gun at your head and says, I love you, do you choose me? And it's like, well, are you going to drop the gun? No, I'm not going to drop the gun. Do you love me? Are you going to choose me? And it just sits there with a gun pointed at your head the entire time. And it's just like, no, I don't want that to be pointed at me. Well, I don't know what to tell you. This is pointed at you because Adam and Eve in the garden, da-da-da-da. And if you're a woman, it's definitely pointed at you because Eve did this. Eve was first, you know, thanks to our freaking misogynistic Paul constantly pointing out that women were the problem. Men didn't do anything wrong. Like, oh my God. And so, yeah, it's one of those things where it's just like, well, what do you want? Right? Because I'm not gonna want to approach you if you've got a gun pointed at my head. And some people put themselves in that position and they're like, I find peace here. And I'm just like, that's fucking crazy, because I don't know how the hell you can rationalize that. But yeah, you know, the very first human interactions, okay, everybody says, oh, you know, humans are such flawed beings. You have to remember, Cain killed Abel. The third person on the planet killed the fourth person on the planet, right? Yeah, because God was a dick, right? That is the only reason why Cain killed Abel, because God shat on Cain. Did you not hear that part of the Bible, right? Like, literally. I'm going to go ahead and play this video while I go find the passage in the Bible, because I know it's going to take me a while to find it. But, yeah, God was not playing nice whenever he was reprimanding Cain.
But if Adam and Eve aren't historical people, then there wasn't a single, first couple who brought sin into the world. There was no moment when human nature fell. There was no curse that suddenly entered creation because two people just ate from a tree. And that creates a massive problem for the version of evangelical Christianity I preached for more than 20 years. Because the story that I preached was simple. God created the world and it was good. Adam and Eve sinned, humanity fell, sin entered the world, we inherited guilt and separation from God from Adam and Eve. And then Jesus came as a solution for Adam's fall. That was it. But if Adam isn't historical, and I don't think he is, then what exactly did Jesus come to undo?
So, story of Cain and Abel, before we enter the curse and all this kind of stuff, we're just going to read a passage starting Genesis chapter 4. And Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. And she bare again his son Abel, and Abel was the keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. Okay? So they had roles in their life. Okay? Abel was a shepherd, and Cain was a farmer. These were their roles that were given to them by their parents. And in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord, and Abel also brought of the firstlings of his flock, and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering, but unto Cain and to his offering he had no respect. So God started this shit, right? Cain was a farmer. So Cain brought fruits and vegetables. And God said, this is trash, Cain. He had no respect. Abel was a shepherd, right? This whole dynamic could have been easily reversed if we just took Cain and Abel and flopped them to where Abel was the farmer and Cain was the shepherd, right? I mean, think about this, right? We always look at this. In Christianity, we try to idealize the Old Testament God and saying that the Old Testament God is perfect and that the humans are flawed. No, Cain wouldn't have killed Abel if God wasn't a dick to Cain. If God wasn't an absolute asshole to Cain in the Bible, Cain wouldn't have killed Abel, right? That's like one of the big moments is that, our horrible... the reason why all of us are horrible is because we all come from Cain, because Cain killed Abel. Abel wasn't able to have children. And so we all come from Cain, so we all have this sinful nature and all this bullshit. Some people tell it like that. And yeah, well, Cain got his sinful nature because he is a fucking farmer, and he took of his offerings of what he had, and God was like, you're trash, dude. Look at me. You're trash. Okay, so think about this. If you had a brother and your mom and dad said, you're a farmer, you're a shepherd, and your brother just brought a random ass lamb and said, here, I've got this little baby, and you brought the best of your fruits and shit, and you were like, I've got these vegetables, and God is just like, I love smelling the burning flesh, like the lamb on fire. Do me a favor, don't kill it first, because I really want to hear it scream, because I kind of get a kink off of that. But your fruits and vegetables, not into that. That's fucking gross. You're trash. Okay? Can we really understand why the fuck Cain would be mad in this situation? Can we really not perceive why maybe God was being a bit of a dick? And then on top of that, so we're living under God's curse, and then on top of God cursing man and women, he decides that he's going to be a dick to random people in his population. And then it just, guys, this is why I tried to stop making God in the Bible unconditionally loving and unconditionally accepting. Right? Everybody says that. God is unconditionally... Well, actually, nobody says he's unconditionally accepting. That's something that you learn on the enlightenment path. But everybody always says, God is unconditionally loving. And then they try to sell you this shit. Right? I feel like everybody has this understanding that the all of awareness is just kind of this loving thing. And so whenever a person walks up to you and says, God is unconditionally loving, we all accept that initially. And then they try to sell us this batshit and say, God is unconditionally, read this shit. Well, it's shit. This is not God unconditionally loving, right? And so then we wonder why a bunch of people get pissed off at God, why people don't want a relationship with God, why people don't... Yeah, because this is stupid. This is wrong. This is garbage. Genuinely, people always tell me, John, you talk like that, you're going to get struck down by God. Whenever I first started this journey, I would pray to God that if I was wrong, that he would strike me down. Because I didn't want to be responsible for all the people who are going to go to hell by watching my YouTube channel. And then I intentionally put myself in harm's way. I would go out in the Alaskan wilderness by myself. I would go in the cliff sides in the middle of the winter. I would slip and I would almost fall to my death, catching myself by my hands at any point in time. If God really, really said, this guy's leading too many people to Satan, we're going to take him off the planet, I gave him every opportunity on a silver platter, but only the opposite happened. I had kind of these little miraculous things, little miraculous situations that would happen that would keep me alive, right? And so that's my thing. This is not unconditionally loving. There's nothing about this that's unconditionally loving, right? Nothing about this that's unconditionally loving. Even the story of Jesus is kind of insane. And so, in my opinion, we have to, if we assume that it's true, this is the only first-hand account of Jesus that we have, period. That's it. This is the only first-hand account of Jesus. And to be frank, this is more realistic than Paul, because how the hell is Paul talking to Jesus, right? If Paul's talking to Jesus, then Helen's talking to Jesus. You see what I'm saying? Because Paul never interacted with Jesus. Neither did Helen, right? So this is kind of and Helen was probably not a misogynistic, asshole like Paul was. And so yeah. Anyways, with that being said, let's kind of get on to it.
Did he come to undo a metaphor? Did he come to undo a symbol, an ancient origin story? Look, I know there are versions of Christianity and other theories of atonement and why Jesus came, other than what I give or what I used to talk about for the reason Jesus came, and that's fine. But evangelical Christianity, especially the version built around substitutionary atonement, this isn't a small issue. No historical Adam means no historical fall. No historical fall means no inherited guilt. And no inherited guilt means no original sin. And if your gospel depends on Jesus dying to fix what Adam broke, then the entire structure falls. Once the Bible no longer looked like a clear and reliable revelation from God, the doctrines built on it actually became harder for me to defend. And that was especially true when it began confronting what Christianity says about the character of God. I couldn't any longer avoid the suffering that has nothing to do with human free will. I couldn't any longer reconcile eternal hell with a God described as perfectly loving. Unnecessary suffering is one of the reasons I no longer believe in the Christian God. Every worldview has to account for suffering in some way, and I get that. Christians often explain much of it through free will. In other words, human beings harm each other. We have the free will to do that, so war, abuse, and cruelty, those all flow from human choices, and that explains why those things happen. But that's not the suffering that continued to press on me. It's leukemia in a 4-year-old. That's not the result of someone's moral decision. Genetic disorders aren't chosen. Earthquakes aren't acts of rebellion by humans. Parasites that blind children aren't caused by human freedom. The predator-prey reality of nature and the extinction of most species on the planet happened long before humans ever showed up. Look, Christian theology says God is all-powerful, he's all-knowing, he's all-loving. And if that's true, then suffering that serves no clear purpose raises a lot of questions for me. And I'm not asking why suffering exists at all. I'm asking why there's so much suffering that appears, just unnecessary or gratuitous. Suffering that doesn't build character, it doesn't arise from moral choices, and doesn't seem required for any greater good. For years I said that God had reasons beyond our understanding. I would say his ways are not our ways, his thoughts are higher than ours. I said those things and accepted them for a really long time. But eventually I had to admit that when I placed the attributes of God next to the world as it actually is, they just didn't fit together. I could keep affirming both, but I couldn't make them fit together. And that's why I no longer believe. One of the foundational bricks to fall that caused the math of my faith to kind of stop mathing, I guess you'd call it. It was the realization that an all-loving God and the concept of hell literally cannot exist in the same reality. It just can't. Look, I know the traditional counter-argument. I preached it. People will say, well, God is all-knowing, so he knew I'd sin, for example, and because he's all-loving, he sent Jesus to die and provide a way out of sin and out of hell. And they'll say he used his power, being all-powerful, to defeat death through Jesus, and so we wouldn't have to go to hell. But that actually, from my perspective, now makes the problem worse. It ignores the fact that God is the actual architect of the entire system. Look, if God's all-powerful and all-knowing,
that's everybody said, well, God beat death. God's the one who created death. Why is it so miraculous that you beat a system that you created? Why? It's not miraculous. You create the system and then you show that you work outside the system. That's not anything that's not miraculous. You're just showing that you work outside the system, right? That doesn't change the fact that the system is still in place and that, it still doesn't make sense. Okay, thanks God. It's really cool that you can show me that you can come back to life and all that, but that doesn't help me whenever I was born in India, right? It doesn't help me that I was born in China, right? Especially in the later years. And in recent years, you can make the argument that now there's information, but what about the people who died, 100 years ago, right? What about those people? They didn't have equal access, right? All of these stories of people smuggling Bibles over to China, all this kind of stuff, just so that people could get there. You have to realize, Christians have this, there's always this ego complex. You're always getting something out of anything. And people don't understand this because they think if they're suffering, if they're doing these things, if they're, all the humility is laid out on the line, then how am I getting anything from any of this? You're always getting something from any of this. Your ego is always being stroked at every step of the way, right? You can try for absolute humility, but then there's going to be a part of you that looks at other people and says, I'm more humble than they are, right? That's your ego stroke, right? There's a part of you that says, I suffer for Christ more than anyone. There's your ego stroke. I do more than anyone. I do this. I'm the only one taking Christianity seriously. There's your ego stroke, right? And so it's you have to understand that this is a part of you. This is a part of your being that you just have to exist with, right? And you have to understand that God, this entire system simply exists, right? This whole creative experience, it simply exists, right? Why does a 4-year-old child have leukemia? Because it's a part of this. It's a part of the genetic system. We're running off of a genetic system, and the genetics get bombarded by solar radiation. They get bombarded by different chemicals, and they get susceptible toward during the event where the genome of the chromosomes are crossing over. During that crossing over event, they're susceptible to genetic anomalies, to mutations. That's the damn word I was thinking of. Sorry. They're susceptible to genetic mutations that occur because that's part of the system, and it's kind of like my thing is humans think that we're these grandiose creatures that's above nature. We're not. We're just a part of the planet that we exist on. We're a part of this entire universe, technically speaking. Yeah, our home is planet Earth, but our home, technically speaking, is existence. And unfortunately, the planet that we live on doesn't seem to have a better means of providing, but we evolved here. This is where we're from, right? And in order for things to live, something has to get eaten, right? I'm sure plants don't like to get cut down and shredded up in order to be processed so that we can sustain our life for another day, right? I showed in that video that plants have intense electrical signal stimuli to pain. Plants feel pain. They feel that something's happening, that they're hurting, that all this kind of stuff. And so whenever you're sauteing a bunch of broccoli because your ego is getting off at the fact that I'm a vegan now, it doesn't change the fact that you're still killing in order to preserve your life, right? That is this existence. There is no holy way to sustain your being. You have to kill things in order to continue to live. That is the fact of life, right? And that's why even walking away from Christianity has changed my prayers whenever I'm eating food. Used to sit down at a disgusting, sloppy burger and a bunch of grease and all this kind of crap. And which I'm not to say that I don't occasionally enjoy those sloppy burgers, but those sloppy burgers do a number on my digestive system. And so, especially now that I'm older, getting old sucks, dude. What the fuck? Bobby. I can already hear Bobby's voice in the comments section. You're only 30, dude. I know. But But yeah, it's we're just a part of this shit show system that's developed out of evolution. We're not above that, and so when back to kind of what I say when I pray, right? Whenever I'm praying for my meals and praying for my food, I'm not praying, God, thank you so much, bless this food. No, I'm more praying to the food, to the head of lettuce. Thank you for allowing me to consume you. I know it sucks to be chopped up and thrown together and have all sorts of salt and things that hurt your being put on side of a plate just so I could eat a goddamn salad. But thank you to the little cherry tomato that exists on my plate. I know that you're about to experience some incredibly painful stimuli when I start crushing you with my mouth, but thank you for enduring it anyway so that I can continue to live. Right? To the burger that's on my plate, I say a prayer to the cow. Thank you so much for giving your life that I can continue mine. Right? It's kind of a crazy way of praying, but that's what awareness does to you. When you realize that you don't have to pray to this external God to, magically bless your McDonald's, You can accept that, these things also held consciousness, and now they don't, so that you can continue to hold consciousness, right? Because there will be a day where your body drops and you will no longer hold consciousness. Now, what happens beyond that, whether or not you actually do become a spirit in the sky, right? As sang by, what's that song? When you die and you lay me to rest, gonna go to the place that's the best. It's an old song. It's like 80s song, maybe 70s song. But love that song. I think that's a really fun song. That and Mr. Blue Sky. Electric Light Orchestra. That's the name. But yeah, it's kind of just this understanding that, everything that holds consciousness is something that holds the light of God, if you want to call it that, but ultimately it holds the light of the essence that the entire universe is made up of, right? And so you can honor that and understand that when you are killing your french fries and you're slaughtering your potatoes, that millions of plants had to die in order to make this meal come together, right? Millions of animals had to die. A lot of conscious beings were killed and slaughtered for you to sustain your own conscious life, right? And it's something to honor, right? Before humans put other humans inside of the ground, we would become carcasses, and other conscious beings would come and consume our carcasses so that they could continue their conscious experience, right? You could say the carcass is suffering, the person who's getting killed is suffering, but death is not suffering, right? Suffering is something that we create when we say this is suffering, right? If I go to the gym and I go and I do a bunch of workouts and stuff, and the next day I'm in intense pain, I can say I'm suffering. Well, yeah, but I'm also growing, right? Just because I'm dying because a teddy bear is ripping me to shreds because it's hungry, right? And I'm the one who's being ripped to shreds. In those moments, it can be kind of fucking crazy and scary, but ultimately, my being is just changing forms. I am becoming a human being that is now being digested by a bear. And thus, parts of me will live inside the bear, right? The parts of my body that can be digested, the carbon atoms that I have in my body that can be incorporated, the genome and the different peptides and things like that, the different nucleotides, all of that gets processed down, broken down, and those nucleotides go into the bear's digestive system, and he uses those building blocks and he uses those amino acids and all these things to recreate and replicate new cells inside of himself. And so in a way, I become a part of the bear, right? Which I think is kind of stoked. I'd like to get eaten by a bear. I want to get eaten by a polar bear. That may be the way that I decide I want to go out. I may be like 65 years old and I'm like, all right, time's up. I'm headed to the Arctic. I'm going to go get eaten by a polar bear so that I can be a polar bear next. You know? Like, whatever. But seriously, car crash, hospital death, polar bear. Dog, come on. Is that even a question? I want to get eaten by a polar bear. Like, that seems pretty legit. Like you don't want to get eaten by something like pathetic, right? Like, what happened to John? You didn't hear about it? It was a horrible accident. He was consumed by raccoons. Like, he got eaten by a freaking lizard. Damn. Like, not even something cool, you know? The guy got mauled to death by a hippo. Like, that's such a shameful way of dying. Not to say, if you've been mauled by a hippo, I'm sorry, you know, but they're incredibly scary. I don't know if you've ever seen a hippo. If you go to a zoo, you see the size of these things, and you see videos of these things out in the wild. That's scary. But they do just look like these big, plump, fat potatoes. You know, between like this majestic, massive polar bear or a hippo, I'd take the polar bear every day over the pie. Let me know down in the comment section, if you were to die in some dramatic fashion, what would be the way that you would go? I would do polar bear. I would do a volcano going off and I'm on the rim of the volcano. I would do, let's see. I would do falling out of the sky in an attempt to go to Mars. I think that'd be a glorious way to die. What would it be another one? It can't be anything stupid like a car accident. Like, that would kind of suck. Like, I've responded to car accidents and people who die in car accidents. I'm just like, man. Like, don't get me wrong, death sucks, but it's inevitable. It has to happen. Everybody's going to die. You know, such is the whole purpose of this kind of video with my best friend from Alaska passing away this morning from leukemia. You know, he died in a hospital, but I know him, and if you would have told him 5 years earlier that he was going to be dying in a hospital, he would not be happy. He would be like, are you serious? I died in a fucking hospital? I was fighting grizzly bears and I died in a fucking hospital? Like, yeah, dude, that's how you went. You know, none of the bears got you. You know, this guy would go out and hunt bears. It was crazy. But yeah, you know. But yeah, you know, maybe opinions change. Maybe I'll end up having a family and decide that I want to die peacefully in a hospital bed surrounded by loved ones. Or maybe I'll never have a family and I decide to go out like a rock star. So, anyways.
The one who decided that the consequences for decades of sin, just a few decades of our lives, no matter how many sins we have and human mistakes, the consequence of that should be eternal conscious torture. He didn't just find hell out there one day, existing, and then try to save us from it because he's loving. He's the one that created hell as the default destination because of our sin nature. I mean, he could have chosen any other consequence. Literally, he could have chosen rehabilitation or like a timeout or even just a, I don't know, non-existence, annihilation. That would have been better than hell. But
he could have chosen reincarnation. Right. I have a feeling there's a reason why Christianity doesn't choose reincarnation, because hell is not scary. Eternal damnation is not scary if you get multiple tries at it. Okay. If somebody's like, oh yeah, I mean, hell is this horrible place and you'll be eternally damned for the rest of for the rest of eternity, but you've got 20 shots or 10 shots and you're currently on life number 6. Oh, okay. I have more fun. 2 more lives and then I'll take it serious, right? But that's the whole issue with reincarnation. We go over reincarnation stories and stuff like that on my in my website. The reason why I don't post them out to YouTube is because then YouTube goes crazy and decides to send my videos to nobody. I was putting my meditations and all the coursework and all the stuff that I was kind of creating and all the science stuff, I was initially posting it to this channel, but every time I would do that, it would freak out the algorithm and YouTube would just stop sending my videos to anybody. Like, I would look at my impressions on a standard video like this, and it would be 3,000 impressions within the first 24 hours. And then I would look at some of my other videos whenever I would start posting the other content, and it would be like 80 impressions in the first 24 hours. And then I would try to post my regular content, which is this content here, and then it would be like 150 impressions in 24 hours. And so it was very evident that me trying to put out that different content on this channel was hurting my channel. So you can go down into the description, you'll see my website, and that's where I have all the other content that I want to put out, but I can't put it out because YouTube's going to penalize me for doing that. So
instead, he designed a system of never-ending torture and then asked for praise from us because supposedly he provided a loophole to escape the very nightmare that he built in the first place. That's not a rescue mission. It's like a hostage situation.
It's a fuck, yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Total control for me, rather than
that's what I'm saying. It's fucking God pointing a gun at you and being like, "Do you love me, little bitch?" Like, what?
Logical necessity was one of the big bricks to fall in my deconstruction. So none of these questions by themselves ended my faith. Deconstruction wasn't one dramatic moment for me.
No,
it was
it's
an
not.
accumulation of problems that I could no longer answer honestly over a decade. Look, I spent more than 20 years preaching Christianity and defending these beliefs with passion. But eventually, continuing to call Christianity true would have required me to ignore what I could plainly see and then pretend I still believed. And I just...
Yeah. Okay, so guys, so we're going to end the video there. You know, I am currently in a space of recreating my life. I'm not enjoying this Texas thing. I do believe in being in a place that feeds your soul. I used to not believe that. Whenever I lived in Alaska, I was mopey little John. Oh my God, I'm so tired. I'm tired of climbing mountains. I'm tired of seeing mountains all the time. I'm tired of being cold, you know. And then I got here to Texas, and I'm just like, I really wish I was back in Alaska. But I don't wish I was back in Alaska per se, because there's a lot of benefits to Alaska, but there's also a lot of downsides to Alaska. And to be frank, the same isolation that you feel in Alaska, because you're 5 days away from the nearest city, the nearest big city, which is Seattle, Vancouver. That's the closest city to Alaska. And so you either fly there or you do a 5-day drive to get to Seattle, Vancouver. And so in that way, Alaska, although it was very big, vast, and it felt amazing, felt a bit isolating, like I'm stuck here kind of thing. The funny thing is Texas feels the same damn way, because although I'm close to Dallas, I'm close to Houston, I'm close to San Antonio, you know, I do not derive pleasure from the city. I derive pleasure in life, especially just whenever I think of like my most excited, joyous, happy moments in life, when I feel the most me. It is never inside of a city. It is always me out in the most beautiful places on the planet, vast, exploring, whether I was screwing off with some random taxi cab driver in Egypt and we decided we were going to go for a joyride, or whatever, which put me in a really awkward situation where I was in the vehicle with a taxi cab driver who was screaming Arabic, and I just had to trust that he was taking me to the destination I was wanting to go to. And the whole time he was just screaming in Arabic. It seemed like this guy had maybe won the lottery by me asking him, because he spoke no English. And so anytime I need to communicate with him, we'd have to pull off the road and I'd have to find somebody who spoke English, and then we could have a conversation, a 3-way conversation where I spoke to this guy. He roughly tries to understand me, speaks Arabic. The guy in Arabic just says, okay, and starts nodding and does the yes thing, and I get back in the cab and just hope that he takes me to the place that I was initially asking for. Fuckloads of fun. I loved every moment of it. I mean, that experience was just so much fun. But that's the kind of stupid shit that I enjoy doing. You know, it's not being so crazy about like, oh my God, I have to exist. I don't have to exist. I just have to have fun. That's all. That's all I want out of life is to enjoy it. And so, So that's kind of what I want to go back to. And so I'm trying to figure out how I can incorporate this channel into all the travel stuff, kind of the whole nutty thing that I'm about is about all the spiritual shit, right? And so I want to try to figure out how to kind of how to merge the whole traveling thing with the spiritual stuff. I think that'd be really, really fun. I probably would start local here in the United States, and I may go down to Mexico. The only things I'd want to learn how to speak Spanish a little bit better before I run down to Mexico, because the consequences of speaking English there, especially if you're 100% alone, can be kind of, I felt much safer in Egypt than I ever feel in Mexico. Like, I genuinely feel like I could just walk around completely alone in Egypt, and I never got scared of I just never felt like I was in any sort of danger in any way. I felt like I might have got scammed, like somebody was always out to try to scam me out of a few extra bucks. But ultimately, I never felt like anybody was going to actively, mug me or anything like that. In Mexico, it's different. In Mexico, my head's on a swivel. And even when I go home to where my mom's from, not my home, but my mom's home in Honduras, I keep my head on a swivel because there's cartel people everywhere, and so as long as you're not accidentally starting crap, But anyways, I'm gonna end the video there. I've got a call coming in from one of my clients, so I will see you guys later in the next video. And thank you for hanging out with me. I enjoyed every moment of it, and I love you guys so much. Okay, bye.